Hey guys, welcome back. So I got here a Briggs and Stratton storm responder. This is one actually that I fixed about half a year ago and sold it to a contractor who said he got lots of great use out of it. But this generator unfortunately does not have a low oil sensor, and he ran it when it was low on oil. So this engine grenaded itself. It cannot be fixed. I take that back. It could be fixed, but it would probably cost $700 in parts, which is completely not worth it. This generator would sell for $350 at best. So I'm going to strip this machine, basically take all the parts except the engine. And normally I wouldn't record this because there's not much to see. It's just me taking stuff apart and not fixing anything. But I have something I want to try. So a few videos ago, I got a Husky pair of generators, and one of them had a bad alternator, so that I parted out on eBay. Luckily, not much of it is sold yet, so I still have most of the engine that came off of that. And it's right here. Obviously, I got some work to do to put this back in working order, but I have enough parts to get this running, at least enough to see if it'll work with this. And actually, I'm kind of jumping ahead here because I don't know if this alternator is going to bolt on to this engine, and even if it does, there's a few challenges, like are the mounting bolts going to line up? And then probably more importantly, it's a plastic tank, so it needs a heat shield around the exhaust. And, I don't know if the Subaru exhaust will clear everything properly in here. I think it will, but I won't know until I try. But before I do any of that, I need to basically get everything apart here. Strip this down to the frame, get the alternator off, and go from there. So I don't want to get my hopes up yet, but I'm thinking that Subaru engine will bolt on and line up almost perfectly with these existing holes for this Briggs. And the top bolts seem to be the same measurement, and the shaft is a standard tapered shaft, so that shouldn't be an issue. So might be able to make a Franken generator here, which would be nice. It'll allow me to free up some space by getting rid of that and all its parts, and then I could obviously flip this and get this out of here as well. So let's get started by breaking this thing down. there. Okay, so I'm just prepping here. I'm going to pull the brushes off. And that ground wire I already removed. And that's it. Once that's out, I can remove this center bolt, which holds the rotor in, as well as the bolts that go around the stator. Pull the stator off, and then start strategizing on how to get that rotor off. Okay, good. Now this stator should slide right out. And it's heavy, so make sure you hold it well. And that's it. So this is the easy one. There it is. All right, so I just got all the bolts out and I'm pulling this this broken engine apart just to see where the point of failure was. Yep, so this actually kind of looks fixable. I say that now that I have it all in a million pieces, but you know, the piston might actually be good. The control, the arm here is definitely destroyed. Yeah, doesn't look too bad. Yeah, it's in pretty bad shape. It's actually broken. Okay, so we're down to a bare frame. I was all excited to reassemble this thing and realized that I cannot. And it's not bad news, it's just I can't do it right now. I put the bell housing from the Briggs on the Subaru, and the holes all line up, which is the good news. Bad news is I do not have the bolts that are meant for the Subaru engine to bolt the housing on. They're kind of an oddball size. They're 3/8 with an 18 threads per inch. And for 3/8 usually it's like a 16 for coarse thread. And can't find it at any hardware stores. Can't even find it really at many places online, but I did order it, special order. It's gonna take weeks to get here for 4 bolts. So I'm not sure why I didn't save those bolts, but quite honestly, I never thought I'd be putting this back together in this manner. So anyway, it is what it is. I also needed a spark plug, so that's on its way. And a recoil, that's on its way. And I believe I have everything else except the airbox. So when those parts get here, I will turn you back on and we can resume assembly. Okay, so I'm still waiting for the bolts to come in, but probably be another week or two. But in the meantime, I'm gonna paint this. As you can see, this top rail, the paint's all lifting up, coming off, doesn't look too good. So what I'm gonna do is just tape it going across just above the height of the label, and take a wire brush and knock all this stuff off and throw some paint on. So you can see it's not a perfect match, but it's pretty close. So it'll mostly just be the top that's that color, and the gas tank is going to sit on most of that anyway. So you'll just see a little bit coming over here, and that's it. So I think anything's going to look better than that. So I'm just going to knock that stuff off, tape it up, and throw a little paint on. So I'll turn you back on once that's done. All right, still drying, but I got that paint on there now, so it looks a lot cleaner. You can tell there is a bit of a color difference, but I think once you put the fuel tank on, no one's going to notice. All right, 3 weeks. They're here, finally. Let's see if it was worth the wait. That's it, 18 threads per inch. Why they couldn't use 16, I don't know. But let's see if it fits. All right, so I'm beginning to see the issue. When I put this new bolt in, it doesn't go far enough in, and the bell housing will be loose. I measure the gap here, it's about 1/2 inch, and the thickness of this bell housing here is about 1/4 inch. So I have to take at least 1/4 inch off of this bolt length to get this to snug up. And I'm trying to figure out why, why won't this fit? Originally I was thinking maybe I messed up the threads when I put the 16 threads per inch bolt in there. But I pulled out the Subaru bell housing, and I don't know how well this shows up, but it's quite a bit thicker here. And when I measure it, you probably can't see this, but it's 5/8 of an inch thick. So I'd say we got to take at least 3/8 of an inch off of these bolts. And this is the new bolt that's in here now. I actually rechecked my stash, and I do have the original bolts. I thought these were not them because they would not go all the way in. But as it turns out, I do have the original bolts. So now I have some extra, so I'm going to cut these down. And if I mess them up, I have a few extra to work with. So let me take care of that, and I'll turn you back on in a few. Okay, I'll cut down to size. You can see these are, actually I found all 4 original bolts. This is the new one. You can see it's about 3/8 longer. And if you compare what came out of the Briggs to the new size, you can see they're pretty much the same now. So I'm gonna attach this bell housing and move to the next step finally. Okay, good. Now for the stator. So I think it's going pretty well. For the most part, it bolts onto the Briggs frame pretty well. The length is good, and the engine mounts are perfect. The only issue I have so far is these mounts here, you know, for the power head, are now a little bit too high. So I need to come up with something, you know, as a spacer to secure that half down. So I need to think about that a little bit. Also, the other thing that's important to do at this point is to spin the engine. So I have the spark plug out, and really what I'm doing is I want to listen to the stator and the rotor. I want to make sure you don't hear any scraping, because if they're contacting each other, it'll be a very short-lived generator, let's just say. So, you know, I have the spark plug out, so there's no compression. And literally just you turn, listening for noise down here. And I hear nothing down here. All that noise you hear is just the piston going up and down, as well as the valves opening and closing. So then the other check here is, you know, I'll actually come down here and just spin it. And I'm just watching the rotor just to make sure the spacing looks pretty even. Yeah, so I think we're in good shape. So let me just figure out something to mount the power head on a little bit better, and then I can proceed with the rest of the build. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead to the exhaust. I want to see if that heat shield is going to work. So it's very close to working. The only issue is it seems to be hitting right here. So I might have to put a little bend in that if possible. So let me take that out and see what I can do. Okay, just going to test for spark and see if the ignition switch works as well. Good. Okay, good. So the ignition switch works and we have spark when it's turned on. It seems maybe a little weak, but I don't think so. I think it'll be okay. Okay, so I'm just noticing here where the carburetor attaches, there's supposed to be a plastic insulator, and that is missing. So I am not going to be able to hook up the carburetor until I get that. I am going to just set it on the studs though, and when I get the insulator, I will install it properly. Okay, so to solve this half-inch space issue here, I took a piece of oak and put some holes in it that line up with these holes. And what I did on the bottom here was put this recess here, which will house a washer and a nut. So I'm going to secure the bell housing, the stator housing end plate like that, and then I'll lower the whole thing down and then put a hole on each side where I can put a bolt through to secure the spacer and the stator to the frame. Okay, good. Now that that's secure, I'm going to focus on kind of reassembling here, connecting the wires, the brushes, getting the the outlets back in this hole up here. Okay, so I had to spend a minute to double check this. This can go in that way or that way. The only difference is that there's a tab right there, but that tab doesn't seem to do much because I can put it in just fine either way. So usually the slip ring closest to the rotor is positive in my experience, and I double checked my video and it doesn't really confirm too much as far as which one's positive and negative, but what I could tell is that this capacitor was definitely on the bottom instead of the top, and I could tell that this stripe was closest to me, whereas if I put it this way, the stripe's furthest away. So I think the orientation goes like this. It's an AC signal in, so technically these wires don't matter too much, but this is DC coming out, and this one is always positive and this one's always negative. So if you flip it over, now it's backwards and you're powering it the wrong way. I don't know what the result of that will be, but I don't want to find out. And the other way to double check too is just by looking at this bridge rectifier. So the power is coming in here and here, and then the power is going out here and here. So this is negative going out, which is going to this pin, which is right here, which is the one slip ring closest to me, and positive is going through this capacitor into that pin, which is right there, which is closest to the rotor. So it might be easier to put the wires on first. I think I covered this before, but these brushes are pretty worn out. You know, I'd say they're definitely past kind of 2/3 of its life here. So I will get new brushes. I'm not sure, you know, the brush length that's on there is probably like a 1/4 inch, maybe less. I'm not sure what that translates into as far as how many hours that this generator will run until those are worn out, but you know, I'll look up this part and order another one if it's available, which I'm sure it is. And these do not need to be very tight. Okay, so there is a grounding wire that connects into this leg, and then the other end actually screws right into the frame. I'm covering the hole, the original hole, so I'm going to have to make a new one. This looks like a self-tapping screw, so hopefully I can reuse that. All right, this is looking a lot more like a generator. Almost everything's done at this point. I do have some air intake stuff on order, specifically the insulator and the airbox. That'll be here soon, easy to install. The bigger issue now, really the only issue left that I can see, is the heat shield. So it does need to be modified. This Subaru muffler is about a ½ inch wider, which is causing a problem. Mostly because the heat shield doesn't come around the muffler like at a 90 degree. It kind of comes like this, but then goes on a 45, and it kind of hits the back corner here. So, you know, turn you back on in a bit with what I came up with. Okay, it fits. It was actually pretty easy. This is supposed to be like ½ inch this way and going down, and screws right into there to secure it. So I had to cut it a little bit short, slid it over, looks like an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And you know, now there's no mounting point for the bottom here, but this piece of wood is actually going to work out perfect because I can just drill a hole now and secure it right there, and it's no longer touching. And there's probably no way to see this, but it's still protecting the stator quite well. So there's the shield. You know, it comes to about there. So I think we're in good shape. Things should be pretty well protected. This, by the way, is an exhaust fan for the armature and the stator. It takes fresh air in down on that end where it's cool. So this is it. This is good. So I'm just going to bolt this all up, wait for a few parts, and then I'll turn you back on. Okay, so I've taken it as far as I can. Tomorrow the insulator should arrive, so once that arrives, that will allow me to bolt the carburetor on and actually run the machine. And the following day the airbox will be here. And that should more or less complete the generator. So I'll bring it outside and fire it up and see what happens. Okay, so this is the Subaru insulator. And this part was pretty easy to get. It's probably a common part to break. So this is all plastic, and there's no steel reinforcement or metal reinforcement here where the studs go through. So when you crank down the carburetor, it kind of sandwiches in between the engine and the carburetor. And if you tighten the carburetor too much, this will be the first thing to give. So I don't have the air filter yet, so I'm just gonna bolt it up like this so that I can try it out. It's probably gonna run a bit lean. The air filter is oiled, which restricts the airflow and increases the fuel flow. All right, so before connecting the carburetor, I'm just going to bleed the line a bit, make sure there's good fuel flow. Okay, good. It's good fuel flow. The fuel color is also good. No debris, no water. So I think we're good to hook this up, turn it on, and let the carb fill up and see if there's any leaks. Okay, good. So I'm just going to turn the fuel on, let the carburetor fill up, and make sure there's no leaks. All right, so this is the fuel cap that came with it. The cap works fine as a cap, but obviously you can't see the dial anymore. I got this for another project, and it didn't fit. And for kicks and giggles, I tried it here, and it is a perfect fit. And now you can actually see how much gas is in there. So anyway, it's been a few minutes. There's no leaks in the carburetor, so I think we're good for contact. So let's bring this outside and see what it does. Okay, so it is very cold and windy today. I'm going to try to start this. I think first I'm going to actually dial the throttle down a bit until I'm sure I don't hear any bad noises from the machine once I start it. Okay, good. It's working well. The only thing I notice is that the RPM does sag a bit with load. So I put a 3,000 watt load on it. You know, to go from around 61.5 to close to 58, which isn't great. So I'm probably going to grab one more space heater and bring it up to, you know, about a 4,500 watt, close to 5,000 watt load, just to see how bad the engine speed gets. All right, good. It runs pretty well. You know, aside from a little bit more RPM sag than I would expect. And, you know, with no load, it's between 61, 62. At half load, it's still above 58. But once you bring it up to like 4,000, it does drop a bit below 58. So, you know, it's not as good as I was hoping for, but considering it was junk when I started, I think it's good enough. So I'll probably turn you back on for the airbox and we'll call it done. Alright, so the airbox came today. This one actually is for an EX27 Subaru. I got it because it was brand new and half the price of what it should have been. So the EX27 is almost identical to this engine, uses the same carburetor, same air filter, I think, same recoil, same air blower housing. So I'm hoping that this fits. So I may have found the problem and why the engine was sagging so much. This spring here is the throttle spring, and it was kind of wrapped around the throttle linkage a little bit. So that could have been, you know, causing it to not behave. So I'm gonna, it's already untangled, so I'm just gonna reconnect it and back off the throttle again and just try resetting this again. Okay, so I had to take a minute just to cut a gasket to fit this. I didn't realize that this assembly did not come with one. Anyway, we should be good to go now. All right, so we're all back together. This box here was for an EX27 engine. This is an EX30. It bolts right on fine. The biggest difference is this filter actually is a paper filter, and usually the EX30s have an all foam filter. And you know, when I saw it listed, I thought, okay, it's a foam filter, but it's actually not. So this could be an issue for some people, but I think you could also just buy an EX30 filter and pop it in there. I think it's the same size, you know, if you don't want the paper one. The other notable difference is the breather hose, where it connects in the back. It's not compatible with the breather hose that came with this. For me, it doesn't matter since I don't have that hose. I'm just going to go down to the auto parts store and piece something together to get that connected. Other than that, this machine's pretty much complete. I will run it one more time. Like I mentioned before, this throttle spring was wrapped once around this throttle control. And that will definitely impact kind of how the governor and throttle function. And that might explain what I was seeing today where, you know, I'd put 3,000 watt load on it and it would dip the engine speed more than it should have. You know, it was still just barely in an acceptable range, but I could tell something wasn't quite right. So most likely having that twist, you know, around there was the issue. So I'll probably end the video here. Potentially I'll turn you back on if I see anything interesting, but that should solve that problem. Anyway, I hope this helps someone. Thanks for watching. Okay, so I lied. It's not quite the end of the video yet. Unwrapping that spring did fix the voltage, or sorry, the Hertz sag. You know, so I redialed it into 61 Hertz with no load. And at a 5,000 watt load, it drops to like 59. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. Untwisting that spring really freed up, you know, the throttle spring and the governor to function the way it's supposed to. And now it's oscillating when there's no load. It goes away when there is a load, which is pretty typical with these. What I've done before to fix it is to drill the pilot jet out. So I did just drill it one size. I'm going to see how it runs. If it's still surging, I'm going to try to swap out this paper filter, you know, for an oiled foam one and see if that makes any noticeable difference. So let's start it up, see if the jet drilling did anything, and go from there. Okay, good. The new carburetor actually did the trick. And I say new, it's not actually new. It looked in worse shape than the one I had on there before, but you know, it just goes to show you it's not necessarily about looks, it's about how it works. And the other one looked a lot better. This one does look a little bit more weathered, but you can't argue with the results. I mean, there's no hunting or surging, you know, it's rock solid. So we'll stick with that carburetor. I put new brushes on. Those obviously work because I was getting power. You know, so this generator, this Franken generator is complete. So I hope this helps someone. Thanks for watching.